All right, guys, so I'm going to do the recap like I have been of the last few weeks, but obviously the last few weeks is getting longer, and I'm taking too much time to do the recap. But I do want to go over things, and I'm going to apologize once at the beginning of this thing. I've said it like 2 or 3 times each lesson. This is such a practical series that it doesn't feel it doesn't feel exactly like a Sunday school lesson. But I told myself I'm not going to continually apologize through the thing. So I'm leaving that disclaimer now. And if anybody wants to leave now, then please don't. It would hurt my feelings. No, I'm kidding. But I did want to refresh us a little bit. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but at the beginning of each class, I've been reading the parable of the talents. And to summarize, this was a lesson that Jesus was teaching to the apostles about proper stewardship and management of the resources that he gives us. And we have drawn several times this wheel, the Jesus donut, the Jesus wheel, about all the different areas in our life and how you and the Lord are together as the spoke of this kind of wheel, right? And there are these other areas of your life that are all, I would say, not equally important. Some of these little pieces of the pie will be bigger and smaller, but it's vital that they're all working properly in order to have a life of balance. You don't want to be somebody who's disproportionately doing well in one area and suffering in another, because believe me, the suffering in an area will hurt a lot more than doing really well in a particular area will feel good, right? You can make all the money in the world, and I've known these guys. They've made all the money in the world, but they're alone because their wife hasn't. Their wife's left them. Their kids won't speak to them. They have no relationships. They have no relationship with the Lord. So I can't imagine an emptier existence than having a giant house and a bunch of things and nobody in it, right? And there's just as many challenges having a lot of those other things and frankly, having serious money problems. I heard somebody say one time that having money isn't everything, but not having money sure does feel like everything. If you're having to worry about how you're going to put food on the table, it makes it really, really difficult to nurture your relationship with your spouse and to be a good parent to your children because you're constantly stressed, right? So we want to minimize that as much as possible. I do want to read the verse. We read this last week, I believe, but this is 2 Timothy 1:7, and this should encourage you in spite of everything I just said about the complexity and the challenge that we have ahead of us in being good stewards. And it says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." I was talking to Pastor Sam, and he said that, and I'm trying to remember exactly the way he put it, but he said that that fear is the opposite of faith, right? It's not so much the lack of faith that's the opposite of faith, but it's fear, right? It's this constant worrying about how I'm going to get through, right? That's the opposite. So he's not given us a spirit of fear, but a power of love and of a sound mind. And the sound mind stuff, that's encouragement, but it's also a responsibility. We are not to just float through life hoping that things are going to be okay without thinking about it. The Bible also says, and I wasn't going to read this for another minute, but it makes sense now. Luke 14:28 says, "For which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it?" And 1 Corinthians 14:40 says, "Let all things be done decently and in order." Right? So we do need to be intentional and plan these things. And then we also talked about just the concept of money. I want to get very clear on the table that money has no moral value. It is not good. It is not bad. It is just a tool. It's actually just debt. It's dollars are just it's just a promise to be paid back in the future. Speaking of debt, last week we talked about some strategies for getting out of debt. We talked about the snowball method, the avalanche method, and the method that'll keep you paying on your debt forever, which is paying the minimum payments. You'll pay a whole lot more, and you'll pay for a lot longer than you want to. And while the Bible does not explicitly state that debt is a sin, debt is dangerous in that it can cause you to be in bondage to money. And being in bondage to money sure feels a lot like the love of money. You know, anything that you're attached to, anything that you're constantly thinking about, whether that's in a greedy sense, I want more, or a fear-based sense of I don't have enough, I'll never have enough, right? Both of those lead to equal bondage to money. So this week, we're going to talk about some strategies and some methods for budgeting. And like everything that we've talked about before, there are going to be shades of kind of Dave Ramsey, and there are going to be some other influencers that I'm using here. And what I've come up with, I think, is the most practical application that I have found, especially for somebody who's trying to take care of all of these things, right? I read a lot of personal finance books and blogs, and a lot of these people, I think, like, is this all you do? It's like the guys on YouTube that are like the fitness YouTubers, and it's like, I do not have time to weigh every bite of food that I eat, and I don't know who does, right? So I'm not looking for something that's obsessive, right? I'm not looking to do something that causes me to, again, be in bondage to something. So I'm going to present to you guys a method that has worked really well for us, and it's really, really simple. I did want to read a quote. I thought it was really good. I'm going to write it down. It's only going to stay up for a minute. This is more of an overarching concept. And it starts with being wealthy is hard, right? So is being broke. And you can just choose your challenge, right? None of this stuff is going to be easy. It takes proper planning and it takes some discipline. Even given what I said, that this is going to be a simple approach, it's going to take some discipline. Discipline and self-discipline and human willpower is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge here. Knowing the stuff that I'm teaching you guys, that's not the challenge. That's all findable, right? But you can't go find the self-discipline and the willpower to do these things. We can try to stack the deck in our favor by kind of setting systems in place. If y'all are here, was it Sunday night Sam was talking about systems, or was that Sunday? Was it Sunday morning? Systems are difficult and annoying in the beginning, but they will make life a whole lot easier once you've got them implemented. So, all that said, here's where I think the problem really lies when it comes to budgeting. Again, it's not knowing the right system. It's not even knowing what you shouldn't do. I think everybody knows. Raise your hand if you think it is a good thing to spend less and save more, right? And that you, generally speaking, and that you should probably budget and plan for your spending, right? I don't think that's where the problem is. I think the problem actually comes from a little bit of anxiety about what we should spend money on, right? So we're in this position where we're either overthinking it and we're worried because we're like, well, I don't know what I need to do, so I'm going to obsess about it. Or, and this is, I think this is pretty common for a lot of people, or you kind of avoid the thought because it's just too scary, right? There's a psychological principle behind all that that someone smarter than me knows the word for it. But when an unknown problem or situation kind of lingers in your psyche, in your world, you just tend to block it out. Call it that kind of the lizard brain mentality, but you just tend to avoid these things. And if you don't know what you should do, and you got a lot of things that you're supposed to do, you're supposed to do, you'll just tend to block those things out. So, I'm going to tell you guys exactly what you should be spending money on, right? Because then, whatever's left, you can get whatever you want, right? Whatever's left at the end of all these things, get whatever you want. You don't have to think about it. So I'm going to go down the list. And of course, this is not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody's situation is going to be different. Every family situation is going to be different. The percentages are all going to be different. That's why I try to throw out some rough kind of ratios, and I say rule of thumb a lot. So take that, examine your own life and your own situation, and then come up with what makes sense for you. But I think one of the things that we can all agree on is that something that you should be spending money on. In fact, it's an easy quiz question. What does the Bible say we should spend our money on first? Toys, exactly. The Bible tells us, the Bible commands us to tithe. And so and we're not going to spend a ton of time on tithe because we've talked about it a lot, but a common objection is that that's an Old Testament thing. But I did want to read in 1 Corinthians where it says, "Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." Now this is in context. This is Paul talking to the church. But that is, and I would recommend you guys grab, I think we have them for free. The book is called Living on God's Economy by Paul Chappell. They're over in the bookshelf thing. Fantastic book on all of the biblical support, both Old Testament and New Testament, for tithing. And we have all heard the round number 10% thrown around. I think that is a good starting point. I'm not going to hammer that one, but I'm just for the sake of having some numbers by this, let's go with that. The next thing that you should be spending money on, and this is where we get a little bit of a Dave Ramsey in here, and some of these things are regular and some of these things are until it's done, right? What? Not yet, actually. Not yet. So what I'm going to recommend next, and this is a Dave Ramsey thing, is that emergency fund. And he says $1,000. I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 to $2,000. I think he's been preaching the $1,000 emergency fund since like 1982.
And that's to start.
We'll do what?
That's why he says that is $1,000.
Exactly.
So you can have it there to start.
Right. And so, I mean, $1,000 is a better start than zero. But I like to be a little more conservative. I say $1,000 to $2,000, again, depending on your situation. Because I would hate for you to have an $1,100 expense that you got to come up with in an emergency. But that's a really simple start. So I would say before you do anything else, before you're investing, before you're paying off debt, make sure that you've got a little bit of cushion. I was talking to a friend of a friend, and he's an entrepreneur, and he said one of the best investments he and his wife ever made was in a good night's sleep. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, they saved up a certain amount of money before they even started everything, and they just always had it in the back of their heads. They said, look, if this doesn't work out, we got this backing us up. And they would kind of use that as a little bit of a cushion. It really is a cushion. But that is number 2. Number 3, guys, and this is where we start to get into, not controversial, but just different stuff. And I'm going to preface this. Well, I'll say it and then I'll give it wouldn't be a preface then, it would be a postface. It's going to be like a midface. It's going to go in the middle of what I'm saying. So guys, you've got to cover for worst case scenarios. Okay, so the midface here is that I'm telling you these things so that you don't have the anxiety of worrying about, can I spend money on this over here? Am I forgetting something over here? So I'm just telling you these things because you'll sleep better at night, especially if you've got 2 and 3. And what I mean by these things here are life insurance, and I'd also recommend disability insurance. And here's my disclaimer, guys. I am a life insurance broker, and so I don't want this to sway. And so when I say that, if you feel like you want to talk about this kind of stuff, but you're not comfortable since I'm your Sunday school teacher, it's so important to me. I will make you talk to somebody else. But I do this for a living because, guys, I've been there with the widows who have no idea how they're going to put food on the table. Their husband's gone, and their kids are all of a sudden completely their responsibility financially. I've been there on the other side of the table with someone who's just lost their spouse, and we get to tell them, this is a very difficult time for you, but there's one thing you will not have to worry about, and that's how you're going to pay the bills, right? And it makes me emotional almost every time I think about a lot of these stories, guys. And you don't do that to your family. Don't ignore this especially. And in fact, the rule of thumb that I always recommend is 10 times your annual spending, 10 times your annual income. Whatever that is. The second best rule, that's a good rule of thumb. The second best rule is as much as you can possibly afford, if it's less than that. But you can take care of your family even if you're not here anymore. And so that's incredibly, incredibly important. Disability, I actually talked about disability in this class. 1 in 4 people in their 20s will experience a disability of 1 year or longer at some point during their working years. That's 25% of people will experience a disability event of a year or more. That's, if you're saving 10% of your income religiously, that is 10 years of savings. That's 10 years of savings wiped out. So there's no way, I mean, there is a way, I suppose, but it's very unlikely that you'll be able to save as much as you could get with something like that. I'm not going to belabor those points anymore, but I have to convey the importance of those things. That's when I was going to read the Bible verse in Luke, and that's when I was going to read the Bible verse that I didn't write down, but says that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. And there's also a Bible verse, guys, that says, and I'm paraphrasing because I didn't write it down, but it said that a man who does not take care of his family is worse than a non-believer, right? And I wouldn't be so extreme as to say that somebody who passed away without having life insurance wasn't taking care of their family, but now you know. Now you have that information. Not everybody had that information. So take care of your family. Next step on the list. Next is health insurance. Yeah, good luck not doing the health insurance thing, but I just have to have it on the list. And then we get to the bigger savings account, right? 3 to 6 months of savings. I mean, do we need any explanation of this? If something happens that's not covered by these two things, you lose your job, your family can afford to live for 3 to 6 months while you look for new employment. This is more of that safety net, more of that cushion that's going to let you sleep well at night. Then, now we're getting into the needs, right? The additional needs. And that's housing, food, transportation. So, and then finally, I'm going to get to, and this is a weird order, I realize. So once these are funded, and frankly, you can do these one time. So once these are funded, you can move this one up the list. But after those are taken care of, then you have things like investing. And I would probably put them, you know what? I'm going to change the whole thing. I think I would put that asterisk. I'm just going to say investing, right? Once those things are done, then you shift the money that's going into there into investing. But after everything is your wants. Needs, you got to have a place to live. But I'd start planning your life not based on how much money you make, but based on how much money is left after all these things are taken care of, right? Then you plan for the type of house you want to buy, and you plan for the type of car you're going to drive, the quality of food that you're going to eat. We talked about some rules for housing. What did we say? It was 1/3 of your income. Transportation, car. I'd recommend that your total auto expenses should be no more than 10% of your gross income. Another good rule is your total cost for your cars should be less than you're putting into savings or investments every month. Those are some good rules that if you follow those, you will probably be on this side of the board in your future. And the last thing, now we think about the things we want to do. So many people, they get a paycheck, they get paid, and then they think about these things, and there's not a lot left for these, or they really, really immature will think about this stuff, right? And they'll just start buying toys, and next thing you know, you've got debt on your toys that are, Dustin's he's such a frivolous spender, and apparently aggressive with coworkers. That's on the record now. So now I want to talk about a couple of different budgeting methods, right? Now we know what needs to go on the list. We're going to talk about how to get it on the list and how to manage it. Anybody ready to fall asleep yet? Do we need to do the Wiggles thing? What do you do for the little kids? You check it out. It's exciting stuff. So I want to talk about different budgeting methods.
Can I add something?
Yes, ma'am.
So the life insurance for me, I don't know, it was hard to say we had to make an expense for that because it just, it didn't seem real, right? But I will say that that's how my mom is, and she okayed that I said this, that's how she is able to live right now. So it was definitely help.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, you might want to talk about how, being the age when you start having kids, that's really the first point where you really need insurance, life insurance. And really, as long as you have dependents, it's really that time in life when you need it. And you can get term really cheap. It's not a big expense. You might can explain that a little more versus whole life, but it's very affordable.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was just saying, when you were looking at 3 and 4, the biggest part of that is it's not in the financial piece of it, but when you get to that point, what a lot of people overlook, especially young parents, is a will. If you have children and you do not have a will, you need to do that ASAP because in that you put in what
Who's going to be your kids?
Yeah.
Well, it's not like I have 2 sisters, so we have it separated. One is the executor, one handles their money, and the other has physical custody. And and we've had that conversation, with them, and they understand what that is because we don't want there to be a conflict or anything like that.
It keeps people honest.
It keeps both of them accountable to each other.
And, it keeps them honest, and it keeps them kind of above reproach. That might not be the right way to say it, but one can never say, or another could never say that one person is abusing things when they can both kind of vouch for one another, right? We can't.
But you don't want to have that financial piece there and not have all of it laid out to a T.
I would completely
Otherwise,
agree.
it's left up to
It's a state.
And I say that a lot. Your children technically become a ward of the state.
I got really nervous when you started looking at all these plans in case I die.
It's uncomfortable. And I got mad. Me and Reade were first married when the accident happened, and he was talking about life insurance, and I was like, how could you talk about money? And I was very wrong. Very wrong.
Again, I feel weird being in this position talking about this stuff just because I don't want there to be a conflict. But to speak to both of them, It was an uncomfortable conversation when we first got married. It was the first financial decision that we made together as a married couple, was to get life insurance on one another. When you're young, like Steve said, when you're young, it's cheap. It's only going to get more expensive as you get older. And there are two types, and I'm happy to talk about the different types. Generally speaking, there's two types. There is whole life. Whole life I would consider to be more of an investment, and probably a better decision if you're a little bit older and if you have a lot more assets, and if you've taken care of all these other things. Term, guys, it's basically renting life insurance for a certain period of time. It's very low cost, especially if you're young, and especially if you're in good health. That's why we tell people, get as much as you can now. You can always get more later if finances improve and stuff. So I appreciate you guys pointing that out. So again, I don't want to leave y'all with just a list of things to do and then say, well, good luck, go figure it out. I do want to talk about, I'm going to go over 10:30, so they need to catch up. They'll have time to catch up with one another. But there are a couple of different ones that get thrown out. So probably the most common is just the traditional form of budgeting. And this is, let's track everything we spend and try to keep it below our income, right? I don't know anybody who's not an accountant and who lives in their spreadsheets every single day that can do that, right? That to me is an obsessive level of budgeting. If you're good with that, great. Go, do your thing. Whatever works for you. Whatever gets the job done and puts more in, like Steve said a couple weeks ago, makes you better off at the end of the month than you were at the beginning. If that's working for you, keep doing that. I just know that as life gets more complex, some systems have helped me. Another one is the 50-30-20 rule. And this is, I say, less of a budgeting. Technically, it's a budgeting strategy, but it's really just more of a way of thinking about your money, where it should go. But it says that you should keep your needs to 50%, your wants to 30%, and savings and investments and stuff like this to 20%. That doesn't really help you decide how and what you can spend. Because raise your hand if you've ever been in this situation before, right? You're trying to decide, okay, I want this shirt, right? And you're just not sure, can I spend this money on this? Let's say it's a nice shirt. Let's say it's a $100 shirt. Can I spend this money on this shirt? Do I have the money in my account? And you're just not sure, so you just kind of take a shot in the dark. And you say, well, I hope it works out. I know I've been there, and I know I've done that. I don't have any $100 shirts, but just as an example. And so I want you to be able to decide really easily, really simply, what to do. Another form of budgeting, and this is Dave Ramsey's method. It's just called the zero-based budgeting. And this means you spend every dollar on paper before the month begins. And that's great. And that's part of the thinking that I recommend you begin with. But I still think that puts you in a position where you're having to think about it all the time, right? Because you've set aside $412 for your grocery budget, and it's like, well, we spent $132 and we only have budgeted $100 a week, and so now we got to take it from this other budget, and then you got in your head that you're trying to balance these things, and to me that's just not practical to do. And so the method that I recommend is called the conscious spending plan. I'm going to demonstrate this in a second, but this relies heavily on technology and automation, which is very easy to come by, and it leverages your willpower against you in a good way. And so let me show you what that means exactly. And I'll just give us as an example. This is exactly how we break down our spending. I'm not going to talk specifics, but I am going to show you how we break it down. So, and for people who are self-employed, get with me some other time, and I'll talk about another step kind of above this to help you manage that kind of thing, because that can be tricky as well. But the way it works is you have at the very top, this is your income. We'll call it your bucket. really just your income account. And what we're going to do is we're going to automatically distribute dollars into where they're supposed to go. So if you have an employer who has a 401k match, that should be the first place your money goes. And that is a percentage of money, right? That's before it even gets into your income account. So let's say what you've got left is, and we'll just do it kind of on $100, like per every $100. So let's say $5 goes over here, so you've got $95 in your basic account. We are going to immediately put dollars into, and we have a separate account just for tithe. It's a savings account. Most banks will let you have unlimited savings accounts. Sometimes you'll get charged for it. Good banks won't charge you for it. Sometimes they'll waive the fee if you do paperless billing, which is an easy thing to do. But we have dollars that go directly into, I'm just going to talk about general number. We have a certain amount that goes directly into a tithe account. That it goes directly to the church at certain intervals. You can automate that. If you go to Ebenezer's website, you can automate certain weekly or bi-weekly or monthly tithe distributions or tithe payments to be made automatically. So boom, that's one thing. I never have to think about this. Totally off my mind. Now, of course, we're thinking about it from a high level, but we do this planning on like a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, and we don't have to think about it every time, right? The next thing is your savings. Automatically, every time I get paid, automatically goes into a savings account. I never have to think about that. After that, you have, and I'm just going to call this your various, so this is health insurance, this is the number 3, right? Life insurance, and DI, disability. Worst case scenario. It's automatically being distributed there. I never have to think about these things. I've made plans. We have adequate life insurance, disability, and also our health insurance. It's already done. I never have to think about it. Finally, we have a totally separate account for our needs. And this is from here, from this account, is automatically deducted our car payment, our housing, our car insurance, everything that you can think of that's a month. We even put our grocery budget money in here. And this is a pretty big chunk of it. So after this might, for you, it might be somewhere between 50 and 80% of what you've actually been paid. Finally, we have what we just call our discretionary account. And this is a checking, by the way. And this is also a checking. And this is everything else. If we want to go to a restaurant, if I want to buy a $100 shirt, if we want to go to Disney World, if we want to do anything we want to do, it comes out of this account. Now, you may do all this and get here, and there's like $100 in here every month. That's fine. You've already got all of the things that you need on a monthly basis totally taken care of. Or you may have plenty of money in here and say you spend it all on the third day of the month. That's fine. You're going to be eating ramen and whatever you can afford on your grocery budget. So we actually, all jokes aside, we actually have a healthy grocery budget set aside. A good rule of thumb, again, for food is $2.50 per adult per month. That's a good round number to start your food, your overall food budget. That's a lot for I probably don't eat $250 a month in food, right? I know my children don't, obviously. So you can decrease that. You can probably feed your small kids for $50-$60 a month in food, right? But that's a good rule of thumb to kind of start. Huh?
We have 2 cars.
Oh yeah. So since these are different checking accounts, we actually have two different cards. This debit card, it doesn't get used. It just exists so things can be automatically taken out of it from all of these places. The only place we'll actually swipe it, and frankly, we do all our shopping at Walmart.com, so it goes online also. We don't swipe this card, like ever. This is the only card that actually gets swiped places. And really, we can spend this all in the first week of the month, and that's fine. I can spend this, every personal finance book and blogger and stuff will say, they'll talk about the latte thing, right? You spend $5 on coffee, you're going to be poor forever. Not if it comes out of here, right? Because I've put money into savings, I've put money into investments, I've tithed, I've got all my family's needs taken care of. I can buy all the lattes I want. I can buy whatever I want with that.
I got a really good thing to add about that point. You may have got to it. Using that method, if you're only ever swiping your discretionary account card, card fraud is no longer a worry either, because debit card fraud is like at an all-time high. So if you're only swiping your discretionary account, you're never gonna, you may lose some play money, but you're never going to have to worry about your needs and that account getting wiped out.
This is always taken care of. And it'll take a couple of months to get into this. Like, it took us a little while to kind of figure out what the right balance was. We're at a point where I'm pretty sure this, like after these things are gone, I think this is like, it's like 80%. It really is here. And this is like 20%. We don't end this with a whole lot in here, which makes us feel great, right? Because we look at it and we say, look, we have exactly this much to spend on just frivolous stuff throughout the month. Now, bonus points if you end the month with money still in that account, right? Because you can let that accrue, and that's how you can do things like, hey, babe, we've saved up a good amount of money in here. Let's go treat ourselves to a nice dinner or something like that. Yes, ma'am.
I can speak for both of us. When we first got married, it started with joint accounts, and then we did. He had an account, I had an account, and then we had a we account, and then we changed it up where it was based on your percent, like we each got a.
We all circled around to one account that she doesn't have. She's not allowed into. And everything.
I don't even know the password. I just looked at him like.
That's great. It's kind of like what we do, but
But in order to do all that, we had to come around to, okay, we're going to be better off if we have one account, and then we each, if you make a large purchase, we each have a conversation.
Yes.
We're supposed to.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to move money out of the account to the other accounts, we're supposed to have a conversation about it. But it took us a while to get to that point because what we realized was, we tried everything. Like, okay, what is your salary? Whatever your salary is, you get X percent as your discretionary funds individually. And then it was like, no, that became a bigger issue.
then you have
Yeah.
to.
And so literally by the time we had Jackson, we had pretty much kind of figured it out. Because I went part-time, so we had to figure it out by then. But to get to that point, you have to figure out what you do with your money together. Just say, because that was probably, I hear what they're saying, because that's, when he goes out, I would get my hair done and he would see the bill, and then he'd go get a golf club, and he plays like twice a year, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What's a golf club?
Yeah.
That's 3 counseling appointments. It doesn't.
Oh, it's not.
You get a happier head down.
No, but it's
You can
like,
imagine some of the conversations.
yeah, we've had them, we probably had them all, so this is, sometimes when you're up there, we may be laughing, but we're not laughing at you, we're laughing with each other, like, oh, that's pretty funny, because, yeah, we've been there, done that, kind of a thing, but we figured out, too, that the part where, like, we don't use our debit card at all. Like, there's nothing we don't swipe it, the only thing we use it is to get cash, but we can find a card that gets certain rewards.
Yeah.
And that's how we track ours, so that everything goes, we very rarely have cash on us. Like I said something to Morgan the other day, I said, better take this while I've got it, because I don't usually have it.
So
I have to spend it.
that's a good rule too, guys. I've heard another. I read someplace else a guy said that you should stay broke, meaning that you should make sure that you're putting these, you're doing what you should for these things. You're putting money into these places. And this is really where a lot of the budgeting comes from, right? To limit your spending. But if you get to this point and you've put so much money into these other places, like savings and investing, that you don't have a lot of money in here, you'll learn to live off of this. Like you will. It's almost feigned scarcity. It's like faked scarcity. And I'm also, to your point, I'm assuming that you guys talked with your spouses about your spending. Right? Now, Nikki and I'm realizing as we said this, like most of our marriage, I've been the only breadwinner. Right? She's been at home with the boys since Hutch was born. And so I think in a lot of ways it's been a little bit easier for us, but we talk about everything. Like I don't spend any money that we don't discuss. I mean, I spend money on food. That's pretty much it. But we don't make any big purchases. We have some rules. Like we don't need to ask each other if we're making expenses under like $100. But we're always checking this account. Like if I know I gotta spend money on something, I'm just gonna check this account real quick, right? If it's a bigger expense, now I just don't worry about it if it's anything that's smaller. But we look at our finances together all the time. We talk about the big picture things here, like could we cut a little bit of our grocery budget? When we want to get out of, we want to pay off our car. We make some plans here where we can allocate more to this, so we can allocate more to this, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about this stuff all the time. I do not recommend, and if this works for other people, that's great. But I do not recommend having his and her money. Like I understand what y'all are saying, and that was.
It didn't work.
I do not recommend it. It's not biblical. It will cause competition among your spouse. That's a dangerous. You never want to be in a situation where you're. I don't know, guys. It's just really dangerous territory to have that kind of a discussion about money, especially if it gets to be lopsided. I've talked to couples who they struggle with the proper relationship between husband and wife because maybe the wife makes more money than the husband. And if you're basing your relationship on, and kind of the hierarchy is not the right word, but the balance of power is not the right word, but hopefully by me using not the right word a couple of times, you get what I'm saying? If that's based on who makes the most money, that could go right or wrong. And you don't want right and wrong to be dependent on who makes the most money. Does that make sense? Right? So I strongly recommend that you have an hour money, look on it, and really a viewpoint on it. I've made 99.9% of every dollar that we've ever had together, but I genuinely would feel like the Lord was disappointed with me if I ever kind of pulled well, this is my money anyway thing. Like I could. Now I was very fortunate. My parents kind of were able to model this for me, and I heard my dad say that to me. When I think I may have mentioned something when I was a teenager, like asking them about this, and he said, "Son, this is God's money anyway. So it's how could I ever pull that over your mother that it's my money, not your money, right? I'm a steward." He didn't say it in these words, but this was the message he got across. Like I'm a steward of this family and of this household, and it just so happens that money comes through my job. That's the only difference, right? That's the only thing that matters. So, yes, sir.
Quick question: how often do you evaluate like excess funds in your needs account from variable expenses?
So I would say if you find yourself in a position where there's a good bit of excess, you could adjust it and maybe give your savings account a raise or give your investments a raise. If it's significantly more, then just do an adjustment. But if it's just a little bit more, I like for that cushion to kind of build up, and then you can almost give yourself a bonus, right? So let's say your expenses are $5,000 a month, and you've got $6,000 going in here as a cushion. And I recommend you calculate all these things and give it a 15% cushion in the beginning, especially, right? But let's say you've accumulated a good amount, you can then give yourself like a bonus, pay yourself a nice little piece. Have some fun, and then put the rest into savings or something like that. Yes, ma'am.
Like, for instance, when you pay off like a car
Yeah.
or whatever, change your lifestyle to change your
Right.
income or the extra funding, because it is there.
Beware of, I think it's called Parkinson's Law, where, that's not right actually, but there's a law that says that as your income grows, your expenses grow with it. Beware of that, guys. You almost want to lie to yourself. You don't let your, Parkinson's Law is that a task will swell to fill the time allotted.
Everybody's thinking disease.
Right, that's what I
I have
heard.
Parkinson's.
Parkinson's disease is also bad. Avoid that if you can. Right? But you don't let your employer decide. Now, okay, so this is all going to lead, by the way, side note. Next week's our last week doing this, and we're going to talk about a couple of ways to look at it. If you do all this, and there's still not enough, like you can only save so much. You can only cut your spending so much. You can only cut down to the bare minimum. And then you don't have a spending problem or a saving problem anymore. You have an income problem, right? And we're going to have an income discussion next week. And that's the one where I'm really am thinking it's going to get uncomfortable because nobody likes to talk about that. But we're going to talk about that. But the income problem is don't let your employer decide for you that your lifestyle is going to change. Now you need to be making sure that you're always earning more from your employer, but you decide when your lifestyle changes. Don't say, well, my boss gave me a raise, so now we can go buy something extra. You're letting your boss dictate how you steward your family and your finances. Don't give that power up to them. So when you get a raise, you keep your spending the same. You give your savings account a raise or your investments a raise, and then you decide when it makes sense to increase your lifestyle because of your increase in income. So, guys, I hope this is not super dry and boring, and I hope you guys get something out of this. I'll include a screenshot of this in the email each week. Has everybody been getting those emails and seeing those links, the supplemental learning? Has that been helpful? Everybody getting value out of that? I'm trying to always include links to biblically based authors and speakers. Occasionally there'll be some secular stuff in there, which I may have already. But there's somebody who came up with this idea before me. So, spoiler alert, I'm not that smart. I just steal ideas. But I'll include that screenshot if that would be helpful. But yeah, next week we're going to talk about income and earning. So please be here for that. So any more questions about this stuff before I close this out? Awesome. Well, guys, I'm going to say a prayer and we'll get out of their way. So, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you so much that we have a group of people and a church family that we can talk about issues of importance, of actual importance with one another in a trusting and a loving way. We thank you for being a loving God who equips us to do the things that we need to do and to be a good steward of the things over which you've given us control and management, Lord. We pray that you would be with the other Sunday school teachers and the other pastors and everybody who's speaking and teaching today, Lord. Pray that you would be with us for the rest of the week. Keep us safe and healthy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.